Music theory with OneNote. Compound intervals versus compound modal distance. Spoiler alert, compound intervals are weaker than Joe Biden after 8 p.m., so it's not likely to be much of a competition, but still entertaining to watch. Kind of like a daytime TV show, like a Jerry Springer show or something like that. Reality TV, so stay tuned, because although we're only playing with one note, it's a beautiful note. You're not required to, but if you have access to it and would like to follow along, we're currently in the OneNote file of Modal Node System, MNS Presentation 1260, OneNote Compound Intervals versus Compound Modal Distance. Presentation list here. We plan on adding plenty more to it shortly. Also noting, in this OneNote presentation, we can spend all of our time on the music theory side of things, but we have another similarly numbered and named presentation where we build these tables in Excel, practicing Excel music theory as well as table visualization all at the same time. We're continuing on with our discussion of intervals, this time going over an octave in the clockwise direction, but looking at the modal distance versus the compound intervals. Remembering there's two units of measure that we're basically looking at. One being the note unit of measure, which there's 12 notes. So if we go above 12, then that's what we're looking at now. The other being the scale degree, which is an errored format of just a modal half step distance. So we want to compare the two methods of going up this time. So let's first just remember our analogy that we want to be keeping in mind. We want to be visualizing the fretboard in such a way that we can open it up. And that visualization would be the fretboard as a map of the territory. We have 7 continent locations on it, like on the globe. We have 5 non-continent destination or non-destination, non-continent locations that we go through to get to the continent or destination locations. Our perspective from space, our head above this low or heavy E string, the one closest to the ceiling on the fretboard, shows that we can kind of visualize the fretboard spinning around like the world is spinning it around, assigning it 12 degrees of rotation, typically working in the 4th degree of rotation, the collection of 7 notes around the C major. Once we identify that, then I no longer want to name the system by the notes, but rather by the continent name equivalents, which would be the modes, similar to the Nashville number system, the number 1 being Ionian, 3 Phrygian, 4 Lydian, 6 Aeolian, 2 Dorian, and so on and so forth. Now, if I shifted my degrees up from the 4 or C, and I shift everything up to a C sharp or D sharp, everything will move parallel to each other. And so that means that all of our intervals will basically be the same. So that's our optimal visualization. Remembering the scale degrees kind of mess us up because the scale degrees force us to change our numbering system within the 7-note structure, and they also are going to be more difficult than looking at things by the continent rather than the note names. Now we're looking at distance now. So if I go from, for example, let's start at the 3. If I go on this 3 and I'm going clockwise to this 6, there's 2 ways I can measure the distance. One is by continent to continent. 3, this would be 1, 2, 3. It would be a distance of 3 continents away. That's equivalent to modal half steps away. If I use scale degrees, however, I make this 3 the 1, so it would be 1, 2, 3, 4 away. Or I can count this and the notes, which means it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That'd be continents and oceans. That would be equivalent to the note distance. So our notation basically has 2 units of measure: distance in notes, distance in modal half steps, or the 7 notes that are in order within our 7-note collection of notes. And then the scale degrees is just that same measurement of the notes, but it's off by 1 because of the error in starting the measurement on the point you're at instead of the point after from that point. Now we could also go around the whole system. So what if I went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? So now I went around the block. I'd still like to say that there's a local distance of 1, 2, 3, 3-note away local distance or fourth scale degree, because that gives us kind of the flavor. And oftentimes that is what people will do on the guitar. But we could measure it all the way around the block. So I could measure it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or 11th scale degree. See how when I say that, though, it doesn't really trigger in your mind the flavor that you would normally get if you say it was the fourth or third note away. And I can also count it up similarly by the notes, which is equivalent to the continent and oceans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, right? So what I would suggest doing then is, if we go around the block again, that we do one of those measurements with the full distance, that would be the note measurement, and the other one with the local distance, so that will give you the added dimension, which we're analogy would be time here, the time it takes to go another trip around the block as opposed to the local distance. However, if you were to drop the notes, as is typically done with the compound intervals, then the only way you can identify that you have an octave up is to do a compound interval, and the similar would be with the modal distance. So let me show you what I mean. So let's go back on over here. We started by saying we have our notes in our musical alphabet. We picked the 7 notes in our collection, started on C, and we went whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and then half step to get back home to get our 7 notes. We're always working in the collection of notes for the 4th degree of rotation, the C major and related modes, but all the intervals are the same for all of the other ones as well. We started by saying if I look at any point, then I can measure distances from it, because there's 12 notes in the musical alphabet. Therefore, we have a distance of 11 away, or 12 if you add the 0 distance. So that's if you're within an octave. However, I could go more than an octave up, and of course I do have directionality. We could go backwards. So we started with this 1 just going forward clockwise, and then we talked about what would happen if I go counterclockwise. And we saw that the scale degrees kind of fall apart when you go counterclockwise, because we don't have a negative scale degree typically. In other words, if I'm on this C and I go forward, if I make the C the 1 instead of measuring from the C, then this D becomes the 2. But what if I go backwards from the Ionian to the Locrian? Well, then you would think that this C would have to be -1, so that this would be -2, the -2nd scale degree backwards. It doesn't work typically. Some people try to use it, but it's kind of a mess, and therefore we kind of lose the scale degrees going backwards. So that's going to be an issue when we look at the compound intervals. If I go forward, what normally happens is that the system would like to say, let me move this down a bit. I could do it right here. So we're going to say, no, I can't do it right there, because it wants to, that we have a compound interval. So I'm going to use the 13 here, because I think that's a little bit easier to look at sometimes. So if we went down a distance of past 12 distance, or past 11 steps, and we go 13 steps up, then how am I going to name that? Now, if you don't say the notes, which is the typical convention, then you're going to have to identify that added distance some other way, and that can only be with a compound interval. So if there's 7 scale degrees and I went up 2 more, I'd have to say it's a 9-note away compound interval. Okay, but that's kind of a problem, because on the fretboard, a lot of people don't really say 9-note away compound interval. They're going to say something like it's going to be a 1-note away minor second. And we memorize all the distances that are like a 1-note away minor second. I'd like to have a way to identify both of those things. So my suggestion would say, I want to use the measurement tool of the notes to say it's 13 notes away, and then say it's a minor second, giving the local distance instead of minor 9, so that I get the flavor and the distance. But again, a textbook will drop the notes and just give you a minor 9. Now, if we measure from the points that we're looking at here, then it's a little bit easier, because now I can go up by notes and I can go up by modal half steps. And when I go in the reverse direction, as we'll talk about later, then the measurements work because we're doing a proper measurement. So the bottom line is, if you do compound intervals, there's a problem with them because I think they're going to be confusing to people. I think most people see the guitar and want to see it with the local distance. Therefore, adding the notes would be best, and it has a problem going in reverse. When we do our modal centered system, I still think it would be best to use the local distance because that still kind of gives you the flavor. However, if you wanted to drop the notes or you wanted to use compound intervals for whatever reason, that would work, and it would work going in the negative direction. So if you wanted to use that, that would be fine. At least it's symmetrical so you can go forward and backwards. Okay. Let's say then that we go 13 up. We're going to go 13 steps up in distance. So let's pick a note. Let's say we're going to go from the Phrygian to go 13 up. Now, if I go 13 up, normally I would say, okay, 13 is greater than 12. So I've gone up over an octave. 13 minus 12 would be 1. So the local distance would be a 1 note away. Now, if it's 1 note away, the normal system would say it's a 1 note away minor second. You can see here that it's actually a 1 note away, 1 modal half step away. But if I make that the 1, it would be the second, which would be a minor second. So if I used that system, I would like to call it a 13 note away minor second, but it's likely it's going to be called they're just going to say minor 9, which would be 7, 8, 9, because there's 7 scale degrees plus 2. This 2 right here would give us the 9. Let's look at the Phrygian over here. So if I looked at the Phrygian, the local distance is a py distance, but I want to or a 3/4 modal range, a py modal range, Phrygian Lydian modal range, or a 3/4 modal range. Let's highlight these as we go. And then I want to go up another to 13. So I'm going to go from here 5 and then 10, and because we're going across the fault line, 11, 12, 13. So we're going from here to here. So that's still a py modal range, but I'm going to say it's a py and 12 to show it's actually another added distance of 12 between it. And I would like to call it a 13 note away from the Phrygian node first modal half step. Again, that's what I would prefer using this method, which still gives you basically the 2 measurement systems, meaning this is the local distance, 1 modal half step away, that's this 1, but then the 13 is here, and if I see it's a P1, that means it's the second scale degree. So that could give us a little bit of help to be able to see the flavor and get the distance. But this system also works in that you could say it's a 13 note away from the Phrygian node 8th modal half step. Now to see that, let's see if we can count the modal half steps. So this gets a little bit messy because we're going distances higher. You can see this is a 1 modal half step. If I count this up, it'd be 1, 2, 3. So here's the 3rd modal half step. Notice there's 5 notes between each string. So if I go here 5 frets back, that's actually 1 half step up. So I go from here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then I could go 7. Here's the D. This is shifted up. The continent is shifted up, so I can see that D goes to this D. 6, 7. Let me try that again. 1, 2, 3. There's the A. 4, 5, 6. There's the D. 7, 8. So we've got 8 modal half steps up, which would be the 9th scale degree. Now, note that a lot of people I don't think are that good at counting up this way because of the distance between the strings. But if you get good at this of course will help you to kind of visualize what's actually happening in the shapes that you're going to use, like for a caged system, or when you learn like the 5 shapes that we can break the fretboard into, which we'll talk about later. But that's going to be the first one. Let's go to the next one then. We're going to say, let me see, how do I erase it? I'm trying to do a new system here. As I erase this, we'll see the rocker over here and my giant eraser. erase. It's not doing it. I hate when it doesn't do it. Like I tell it to erase and it doesn't, that one won't go away. All right, whatever. All right, let's go back and say, let's get to the pointer and I can erase it with the pointer. Okay, and then I'll move this down and we'll move this down. Okay, I'm gonna do it better this time. So now we're gonna go 14 away. So we're going 14 away. So 14, what's the local distance? 14 minus 12 would be 2. So that would be a 2 note away, which normally, if it was 2 notes away, we'd call it a 2 note away major second. So I would like to call it then, with the normal system, a 14 note away major second, but it's likely that they're gonna call it just a major second. This says major 9, it should be a major second. That's an error, but they might just call it a major second and drop the 14 would be the thing. So let's say we start from the Ionian and we're gonna go, the local distance would be 2 notes away. So we're gonna go up to the Dorian. So there we have it. So from my perspective, I'd like to say it's an ID modal range or a 2-1 modal range. That would be the local modal range, would be an ID or a 2-1 modal range. And but I want to go 14 up, so let's change the color and say we're going to go 14 up. So if I go 14 up, it's going to be 5, 10, and then let's go 15, and then 14 would be back to here. So there's going to be 14 up, and so I would call that still an ID modal range or a 1-2 modal range, but it's and 12 because there's another 12 notes or octave between them, which I would prefer to call a 14 note away from the Ionian node first modal half step, which would be the second scale degree. So because that gives you each of the measurements, once again, the first modal half step, if you use this from an Ionian node, you'll start to see that that is the same as the second scale degree, the Ionian mode being the major scale. So you're going to basically know these scale degrees from the nodes that we're on, and so that would be the idea. But you could say it's a 14 note away Ionian 8th modal half step, right? And that's because we would take the modal half steps that you can go up and then add the added modal half step here, so we keep on going around in a circle. So in other words, I could take this 8 minus the 7 to get to the first or the local distance. And if you did this, you could drop the 14 and just call it an Ionian 8th modal half step, which would be a 9th scale degree. And then again, you could drop it down. 8 minus 7 would give you the 1. So let's try to count that up. So if I counted 8 up, I could say this is going to be 1, 2, and then here this repeats over here because there's a 5 note distance. That's still 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this is still 5, 6, 7. This is still 7 and 8. So you can kind of see how that you practice counting up by the notes that are actually in the shape in order as you go up through the strings, noting there's a 5 note distance between everything except here because the fault line has been shifted up. This tectonic plate has been shifted up. All right, let's try the next one, see if I can get better at this. Do this a little bit more clearly. This eraser is just useless. I mean, it's just crazy. Why doesn't it erase? Okay, I'll just do it this way then. Get this giant eraser, and it doesn't do the job. It doesn't do the job. All right, let's try the next one. We'll move this down. Okay, so now we're going 15 notes away. So if we go 15 notes away, what's the local distance? It's over 12, so 15 minus 12 would be like 5 minus 3, 5, 4, 3. It would be like 5 minus 2, which would be 3. So a 3 note away would normally be, if I had a 3 note away, it would be here. 3 note away minor third. So I'd like to call it a 15 note away minor third using the normal terminology, but oftentimes they would just drop the 15, which means I'd have to call it a minor 10th because there's 7 there's 7 scale degrees, plus 3 would be 10. So, but, so let's say we're going to do this from like a minor third. So let's say we do it from the Phrygian again. And so if I'm on the Phrygian, we're going to say the local distance is going to be 3 notes away. So 1, 2, 3 would be going from an IP modal range. So I would call that 3 note away. Well, I'm sorry, a PX modal range. A PX modal range or a 3-5 modal range. But I want to go up by 15. So I'm going to say, okay, that's going to be, let's make this green. We're going to say this will be 5 and then 10 as we cross the fault line, 10, and then I could go down here to 15. So we'll say that's going to be 15 that we're going up. All right, so this is still a PX modal range, but it's a PX and 12, we'll say, or a 3, 5, and 12 on the modal range. I'd like to call it a 15 note away from the Phrygian node, second modal half step, which would be the 3rd scale degree. So it'd be similar to this notation because it's going to give you the flavor with the second modal half step away from the Phrygian node. Will start to feel like the 3rd, the minor 3rd, because the Phrygian is a minor mode, right? So you'll start to see the distances from the nodes, right? That's how you want to see basically the distances. So, but you could call it a 15 note away from the Phrygian 9th modal half step. 9 modal half steps, if you take 9 minus 7, you would be the 9 minus 7 would be the 2nd. So you can get, if someone just said it's a Phrygian 9th modal half step, which would be the 10th scale degree, we can take the 9 minus 7 to get to the 2nd modal half step. So let's try to count that up. If we count 9 steps from here, it would be 1, 2, and then I could see this one repeating. So 2 is 2 over here, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I can see this 5 over here, 5, 6, 7, and there's the 7, 8, 9. So you can kind of count that up. It's good practice to try to count that up that way, and that'll give you then the distance, and of course that would mean that it would be the 10th scale degree up if I made this the 1. Okay, let's try the next one. I'm going to see if we'll reveal the rocker and then delete these. So delete this. I have to do it this way because the eraser is lame. Technical term. The eraser is lame. It's large. Large is not always better, apparently. I'm sure you've heard that before, but in this case, that is true. Because this giant eraser is not doing the job. Not doing the job. Okay. So let's go 16 away now. We're going to go 16 away. So what would be the local distance? It's over 12, so 16 minus 12 would be like 6 minus 2, which would be 6, 5, 4. So normally you would think it would be a 4 note away major third. I'd like to call it a 16 note away major third, but likely it's going to be called just a major 10 in a textbook, right? So then you'd have to say 10 minus 7 would give you the third and figure out the 16. So let's say we do a major third from the Ionian, or let's try the Mixolydian just to mix things up. So we're going to say then, actually the Mixolydian's kind of a ways off from the corner. Let's keep it with the Ionian. That's in our screen. So it's going to be a 4 note away major third. So local distance, 1, 2, 3, 4 would be here. That would be an IP modal range or 1-3 modal range. So it would be an IP modal range or a 1-3 modal range, but we want to go 16 away from it. So let's pick another color here and we'll say, okay, we're going 16. That would be 5, 10, and then 15 as we cross the fault line, and 16. So it's still an IP modal range or a 1-3 modal range, but and 12, because there's an added octave between them. I'd still like to call that a 16 note away from the Ionian node, but then keep the local distance of the second modal half step. As you can see, 1, 2, which would be the third scale degree if we started from here. But you could call it a 16 note away Ionian ninth, and then you could drop the 16 if you wanted to, just calling it an Ionian ninth, which would be a 10th scale degree. So if we count that out, then I want to count 9 notes that are in the 7-note collection in order. We've got the Ionian, so the Ionian is 1. We can also, of course, count it out by the Nashville number system. So if I'm going from the I'm going from the Ionian 1, that's not the one, 1 note away, 2, there's the Phrygian, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, 7, and then 8, 9 notes away. And if I made that the 1, it would be the 10th scale degree. Okay, let's try this again. Let's make this small. Do the next one. Keep it rolling. Keep it rolling. Rolling, rolling, rolling. Keep those doggies rolling. Rolling, rolling, rolling. Roll high. They're not doggies, they're cows. And if you roll them, you're gonna break their legs because they have to run. You're rolling the cows. What are you doing? That's not how they're not circular. Just because we plumped them up doesn't mean you can just roll them down. Okay, 17. So let's go 17 away. What would be the local distance? 17 minus 12 would be like 7 minus 2, 7, 6, 5. So it would be a 5 note away, local distance, 5 note away, perfect fourth. So I would like to call it then 5 plus 12, or a 17 note away, perfect fourth, with a normal naming convention, but likely they're going to call it a perfect 11th in a textbook, which you would have to say 11 minus 7 would give you the fourth. So if we're on, let's go from the Ionian again here, and we're going to say then 4, it's a perfect fourth, 5 notes away, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 notes away. So, okay, and let's change the color. That would be, then I'm going to call that an IY modal range, or a 1-4 modal range. And I'd like to call it a 17 note away from the Ionian node. If we go 17 up, then because not the local distance, right? The local distance here would be a 5 note away Ionian third. 1, 2, 3, third modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree. But we want to go up 17. So let's count it up. 5, let's do a different color. I thought I changed the color, but I didn't. So let's go 5, 10, and then 15 as we cross the fault line, 16, 17. So it's still an IY modal range or a 1-4 modal range, but now it's and 12 because there's another 12 notes in between it, I'm going to say. And so I could call that a 17 note away from the Ionian third modal half step, which would be the 4th scale degree, but you might just call it an Ionian 10th modal half step, which would be the 11th scale degree. So right, so you could drop the notes that way and make it a little bit shorter if you wanted to shorthand it. But again, I like saying the notes typically. I think that's the better way to do it. This way gives you the distance and the flavor. So, but let's try to count 10 up from here. So if I go up 10, 1, 2, 3, and this one repeats over here, 3, 4, 5, this one repeats here, 6, 7, this one repeats here, 8, 9, 10. So if we practice kind of counting it up that way, I think that's just good practice. Let's make this small again. Let's do this a little faster. We're running long on time. This is, you're breaking your own rules. You've only got to go so much time to get to the vault, man. And now you're pulling too much time. You're pulling too much time. Okay, I know what I'm doing. Wyatt. All right. I don't know why I've got movie lines in my head. I'm gonna move down. Well, let's go to this one. No one knows these movies anymore. No one even watches movies. I need video game lines. Let's say we go 18 notes away. This is the weird one. So if we go 18 notes away, let's make it go 18 from the Locrian. Remember, that's the weird one where it might be an augmented or diminished, because if I say 18 minus 12 would be 8 minus 2, which would be 6, which would be a 6-note away diminished fifth under the normal convention, which you would think would be like a minor fifth or something, but no, they had to name this one a perfect, which means they had to do something other than minor for this one, so they called it like a diminished fifth, but it could be an augmented fourth, and it's just a mess. But I'd like, if it went up, you would think it would be something like an 18-note away diminished fifth, but no, they might call it something like just a diminished 12th or possibly an augmented 12th, right? So, okay, so, but if we take it from the Locrian over here, if we go to the crazy Locrian, then we might call it an 18-note away from the Locrian node, which would be a fourth modal half step. So let's count it out here. So what did I say? 6. It's 6 local distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That would be an NY modal range. So from a modal range perspective, I got to do some scrolling on this one. It would be an NY modal range, a 7-4 New York modal range. I think the crazy Locrian, it makes sense because they're voting in some like communist over there, I think. If I don't have my, I don't know, maybe I don't know what I'm talking, I don't know. So, but it seems like they've gone crazy. I think they've gone completely. Anyway, let's not get distracted. So, but we're going 18 up. So if we go 18 up, we're going to say this is going to be 5, 10, and then across the fault line 15, and then 16, 17, 18. So it's still a NY modal range, a 7-4 modal range, but it's and 12. So 7-4 and 12. So I would like to call that, ooh, that color doesn't work there at all, does it? I'd like to call that an 18-note away from the Locrian node, fourth modal half step, which would be the 5th scale degree, but you could call it just a Locrian 11 modal half step away, an N 11th modal half step, which would be the 12th scale degree, which means you'd have to take 11 minus 7 to get to the local modal half step, right? So, but let's try to count it up from 11 here. I'm going to stop saying right. I'm not asking approval. I know what I'm doing. Why this is going to be 11 modal half steps. So 1, 2, and then we can repeat this over here. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, and repeat this over here. That's still 5, 6, 7, 8. There's still 8, 9, 10, 11. So 11 notes. If I made that the 1, it would be 12 scale degrees away. Okay, makes perfect sense. Let's go ahead and remove this. Let's see if the eraser, I'll try the eraser again. The eraser worked on that one. The giant eraser, but now I can't scroll to the right with the eraser. Okay, they can't erase that because that's not part of the thing. Erase, scroll. I have to go back to the pointer. Come on, OneNote. You should be better than this. You need to be better than this. You've got, okay. All right. Let's do the next one. Do better, OneNote. Okay. 19 notes away. So if it's 19 away, what's the local distance? 19 minus 12 is like 9 minus 2, 9, 8, 7. So it'd be a distance of 7, which normally would be a 7-note away, perfect fifth. 7-note away, perfect fifth. Let's do that from the Ionian again. So if I went 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we can say it's an IX modal range. So from the Ionian, it would be an IX modal range or a 1-5 modal range, but we want to go a distance of 19. So I'd like to call that a 19-note away perfect fifth, but likely you might hear it called just a perfect 12th, in which case you'd have to take 12 minus 7 to see that it's a fifth and then figure out the distance. Right, but I'm going to count it out. Let's say it's 5, 10, 15, 20, and then 19 would be back here then. 19, boom. It's still an IX modal range, a 1-5 modal range, but I'm going to say it's a 1-5 or an IX and 12. So I'd like to call that a 19-note away from the Ionian node, fourth modal half step, which would be the fifth scale degree, but you could just call it an Ionian 11th modal half step, which would be the 12th scale degree if you wanted to drop the notes. So let's count it up. Then I'm going to count 11 modal half steps up. 1, 2, this 2 repeats over here, 2, 3, 4, 5, this repeats over here, 5, 6, 7, this repeats over here, 7, 8, 9, this repeats over here, 9, 10, 11. So again, you could count that up multiple different ways, but the point is that the notes repeat. You know, you have this on the fretboard, so you have to, again, deal with the fact that you have a fretboard that's going to give you that staggered effect. All right, so you know what I'm talking about. Let's do that. Let's close this out. Most people don't do that; they just know it by shape. But if you learn how to count it up, then that is helpful. It is a good thing to know. Good things to know. All right. Let's do the next one. Otra vez. Otra vez. Put this over here. We'll bring that down. Okay. So now we're on a 20 note away. What's the local distance? 20 minus 12 would be like 10 minus 2, which would be 8. So the local distance would be an 8 note away, which would be a minor 6. So let's do that from like the Phrygian here, let's say. And so we're going to say local distance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, which would be a PI modal range or a 3-1 modal range. I'm going to call it a PI modal range, a 3-1 modal range, but we want to go 20. So normally I might call that a 20 note away minor 6, but you could just call it a minor 13. 13 minus 7 would give you the 6. So if I went up 20, it would be 5, and then 10, and then 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So it's still a PI modal range, a 3-1 modal range, but it's and 12, and 12. And I'd like to call that then a 20 note away from the Phrygian node, but keep the local distance of a fifth modal half step, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which would be the 6th scale degree. But you could drop that and just call it a Phrygian 12th modal half step, a P 12th modal half step, which would be the 13th scale degree if you wanted to drop the notes. Or you could be nice and add the notes, a 20 note away Phrygian 12th modal half step. But let's count that up. If I count that up, it's going to be like 1, 2, 3. This is 3 again. 3, 4, 5, 6. This is 6 again. 7, 8, 9, 10. This is 10 again. 11, 12. 12 notes away, which would be 13 if I made that the 1. All right, let's go back and do the next one. Next one, otra vez. Removing this, I keep on wanting to try to remove that thing there, but you can't remove that because that's not a highlight point. All right, why does that stupid thing pop up? That thing is annoying as well. It's okay. All right, so let's make this large and return to the fold. All right, we'll bring this down and then, okay. Take this thing out like Top Gun Maverick taking out something. I'm going to make this, I don't know, let's go 21 up. 21 up. We're going 21 minus 12 to get the local distance would be like 11 minus 2, which would be 9. So 9 would normally be a 9 note away major 6. So let's take that from the Ionian. 9 note away major 6 has a local distance of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that would be a IA modal range, a 1-6 modal range. Here's an IA, here's a 1-6 modal range. But we're going up 21 as the distance now. So if I count that out, it would be 5, 10, 15, 20, 21. So this is going to be still an IA modal range or 1-6, but it's and 12. To add the octave in there. So normally you might call that a 21, major 6 if I'm going to use that term, but you might hear it just called a major 13th, in which case you'd have to take 13th minus 7 to see that it's going to be the 6th. Or we can call it I'd like to call it a 21 note away from the Ionian node, 5th modal half step, which would be the 6th scale degree. But if you wanted to drop the notes, you could just call it an I 12th modal half step, which would be the 13th scale degree. So if I count that up to 12 steps from here, which would be 13 scale degrees, it would be 1, 2. And if you know your shapes, you can count this up within like the 5 pentatonic kind of shapes, or the 5, not pentatonic, but the 5 shapes that you can cut the fretboard into, which you can then break and distill down to 5 pentatonic if you wanted to. But anyway, the point is, if you know the distance between each string is 5 notes, then that's another way that you can build, your shapes and visualize the fretboard. So we can say 5, 10, 5 note distance between, 1, 2, 5 note distance between the strings. So this is still 2, 3, 4, 5 note distance between the strings. So here still 5, 6, 7, 8. This one has a different distance, 4 because of the fault line, 8, 9, 10, and then 11. And this is still 11 and 12, right? So 12 note away, which would be 13 if I made that the 1. Okay, let's try the next one. We're going to say, all right, we're going to go to the next one. Took that out like Top Gun Maverick. All right, we're going to say next one, making this large. All right, let's bring, oh, wait a sec. Bring this down. All right, so now we're going to say 22. So if we go 22, what's the local distance? 22 minus 12 would be like saying it's 12 minus 2 or 10 away. So we could do that from, let's say, 10 away from the Phrygian, let's say. And so we're going to say then 10 notes away would be 5. And wait a sec, from the Phrygian, we're going to go 10 notes away from the Phrygian. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So here we go up to this one. Let's do that. And but they want to go 22 notes away. So usually 10 notes away, by the way, would be a 10 note away minor 7. So I'd like to call it a 22 note away minor 7 if we go 22, but you're likely to hear it called just a minor 14, in which case you'd have to take the 14 minus the 7 to get to get the 7th that we're looking for the local distance. So I'm going to call, if I go 22 away, let's do that. It's going to be 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 would be up here. So that would still be a PD modal range. So I'd like to say it's a PD modal range here, PD plus 12 or PD and 12 or 3, 2, and 12 modal range. So I'd like to call it a 22 from the Phrygian node, 6th modal half step, which would be the 7th scale degree. But you could drop the notes and just call it a P13th modal half step, which would be the 14th scale degree. Counting out the modal half steps would be 1, 2, 3, and then that repeats over here 3, 4, 5, 6. That repeats over here 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That repeats over here 10, 11, 12, 13th, and that would be the 13th modal half step if I made that the 1/14th scale degree. By the way, there's various ways that you can shortcut that, right? If I'm going over an octave, you might say, well, I know this shape is an octave going from the Phrygian to the Phrygian, and an octave, if I'm talking about 7 notes, means that I started here, so I must have gone up and I'm repeating, so that would be 7 away. And then you could start from there, right? 7, 8, 9, that's still 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and so on and so forth. So I'm just trying to count it out so that you can see the distance, even though we're on a fretboard and we're going a long distance, which you can't do on one string, so that you could start to visualize it different ways. All right, let's go ahead and see the rocker, and let's delete these. and do 1 or 2 more. Dos más, por favor. All right. Dos más, por favor. This is muy interesante, like an Ella freaking Fonte. It's my Spanglish. Been practicing my Spanglish. All right. Let's say we go 13 away. Then the local distance would be 13 minus 12, which would be like doing 13 minus 23 minus 12 would be like 13 minus 2, which would be 11. 11. Let's go from here. And the 11 note away would normally be like a major 7 distance. So, so major 11 note away would be 5, and then 10, 11. So it would be an IN modal range, so an IN or a 1-7 modal range, but we want to go 23, so normally I might call that a 23 note away, which would be 23 major 7, or you can have a compound interval of a major 14, which means you'd have to take 14 minus the 7 to see the local scale degree. So let's count it out, 23, so let's go 5, 10, 15 as we cross the fault line, 20, 21, 22, 23. So it's still a 1-3 modal range, but it's and 12 because it has another octave. So I'd like to call that a 23 note away from the Ionian node 6th modal half step, that being the local distance, which would be the 7th scale degree. But we could drop the notes and just call it an I 13th modal half step, which would be the 14th scale degree. Let's count up that 13 just so we can get used to doing that within the shape. So I'm not counting the oceans, right? So we're going 1, 2, and then I can repeat over here 2, 3, 4, 5. That repeats over here 5, 6, 7. Now notice this is 7. That makes sense because, wait, no, this is 7. That makes sense because that's the octave. Hopefully I got that right. 7, and then 8, 9. And then that 9 repeats over here, 10, 11, 11 repeats, 12, 13. So there's the 13 away. All right, let's stop it there. I'm getting a little tired. Let's go ahead but let me just, we could go up another more, and that means that we'd be going past 2 intervals. So I won't map it all out. I'll just talk it out. So we'll just check it out for a little bit here. So let's say we go down and bring this down. So now if I go up 24, I can see 24 went up past 2 octaves because it would be 12 plus 12 from a note distance. So that would be like a perfect first, or from the Ionian node, it would be 24 notes away from the Ionian 0th modal half step, which would be the first scale degree, or if I drop the notes, it would be an Ionian 14th modal half step, which would be the 15th scale degree. So if I go to 25 steps up, then I know that the actual distance must be more than 2 octaves up, more than 12 and 12. So I can take 25 minus 24 means it would be like going 1 local step up. So I'd like to call that possibly a 25 note away minor second, but they might just call it a minor 16, because 16, if I look at the collection of 7 notes, would be 7, 7 and 7 would be 14, and then so 16 minus 14 would be 2, because it would be a minor second. So if I look at a minor over here, then that would be like a 3, 4 plus 24 modal range instead of plus 12, because there's 24 notes between them. I'd like to call that a 25 note away from the Phrygian node 1st modal half step, which would be the 2nd scale degree. But you could drop the 25 notes and just call it a Phrygian 15th modal half step, which would be the 16th scale degree if you wanted to. And once again, you can see that the 15 is above the 2 collections of 7, right? So you could take the 15 minus 7 would bring it down within the proper range to get 15 minus 14, which would bring it to the 1st. Okay, we went up to 26. 26 is over 24, which is 12 plus 12, so it's over 2 octaves. 26 minus 24 would be 6 minus 4, which would be 2. So you would think it would be a 26 note away major second, but you could drop the notes and call it a major 16, which means that that 16 is over 7 notes plus 7 notes, or 14. Therefore, it's over 2 octaves. So 16 minus 14 would get you to the local distance in scale degrees of a major second. So I'd like to call that, then, if it's the Ionian that we're looking at, an ID modal range and 24, because there's a 24 distance between them, 2 octaves up between them, added. So I could call that a 26 note away from the Ionian node first modal half step, which would be the second scale degree. But if you wanted to, we could just drop the notes and call it an Ionian 16th modal half step. 15th modal half step, which would be the 16th scale degree. That 15, once again, is over 7 and 7, 14. So you take 15 minus 14 would get you to the first modal half step, which would be the local modal half step distance. If I went up 27, let's do one more, then we'd say 27's over 24, so 27 minus 24 would be 7 minus 4, which would be 3. So a 3 note away is usually a minor third, so I'd like to call that a 27 note away minor third. But if you drop the 27, you could call it a minor 17, the 17 being over 7 plus 7, which is 14. 17 minus 14 is like 7 minus 4, which would be 3. So that's how you can get it down to the local scale degree distance. Let's look at the Phrygian mode, because that's going to be in the Phrygian or the Dorian. Let's look at the Dorian. We haven't. So dy and 24 modal range, or a 24 and 24 modal range. I'd like to call it a 27 note from the Dorian mode second modal half step, but if you wanted to drop the notes, you could call it a D16th modal half step, which would be the 17th scale degree. 16 is over 7 and 7, which is 14, so 16 minus 14 would be like 6 minus 4, which would be the second modal half step, which would be the third scale degree. So hopefully you can see how this kind of maps out. All right, so notice now this way, either way you do it, compound intervals will work once we go in the negative direction. So once again, compound intervals over here fall apart when you go in the negative direction. So next time we'll go up and say, well, what happens if we go negative? We almost have to add the notes to go negative. When you go this way, when you go counterclockwise, you can still use either method, basically using the notes and then the local distance in the negative direction, or you can use the negative compound modal half steps going counterclockwise if you measured it properly using modal distance rather than the scale degrees.